when we get, shot metaphorically with an arrow, if something's bothering us, like let's say we have a sadness, then if I add things on top of it, like, woe is me, like I shouldn't be feeling sadness, like it's not that big a deal, or like I'm the kind of person who doesn't experience sadness. Like these are all thoughts and feelings that I've had over the years and still do sometimes. Like, no, it should be a certain way, like resisting what is, that there is this arrow that you've been shot with is like shooting yourself with a second arrow.
Welcome to the Funny in Failure podcast, a podcast that celebrates failure and shines the light on the emotional side of comedy, with yours truly, Myq Kaplan.
Today's guest is an incredibly deep thinker. Myq exercises his brilliant philosophical mind, all with a lot of laughs and wisdom. We dive deep at the end and discuss his views on success within the comedy industry, which I think applies perfectly to the world we live in. Regardless of whether you're in the industry or not, Myq is ridiculously quick thinking and funny. You can see how he's managed to be one of the top comedians in the world, and it was an absolute pleasure to hear his thoughts and have a first row ticket to see how his mind works. He lives his life on his terms, and it's something to be admired. Also, Myq has a great understanding of Buddhist philosophy, which I love, in particular how he applies it practically to the world. This man needs no introduction, but I'll give one anyway. Myq Kaplan is a stand-up comedian who's been in the business for 20 plus years and has done pretty much everything there is to do, including appearances on The Tonight Show, Conan, Letterman, James Corden, Seth Meyers, Comedy Central, Last Comic Standing, and America's Got Talent. Myq also has a half-hour special on Comedy Central, a 1-hour stand-up special on Amazon called Small Dork and Handsome, and a new dry bar special called Alive from the Universe, as well as 2 podcasts, The Faucet and Broccoli and Ice Cream. His debut album, Vegan Mind Meld, was one of iTunes' top 10 comedy albums of the year, and his newest album, AKA, debuted at number 1. Myq is also the author of Heartbrain Art Train, which is a collection of 75 plus new pieces with jokes by Myq Kaplan and art by Ramin Nazer. So as you can imagine, we dive deep and we cover a lot. And we chat about his unique name, views on success and longevity, comparing a love of music and the journey behind it, words, and the second arrow concept. Before we get into this chat, in case you aren't aware, the videos are now available on YouTube under Myq Kaplan. That's Kahan with a K, unless you're listening to it already. I'll still be posting snippets of these chats on Instagram under Funny in Failure, so check them out if you want to stay in the loop for upcoming episodes, or you want to ask a guest a question. I'd also love it if you would share the podcast or share your takeaways from the chat. It really motivates me, helps the podcast grow, and ensures I can lock in amazing guests like this one. And just as a final reminder, the podcast comes out every Monday at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, with the video to follow the following day. Anyway, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's epic episode. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts of yours, and what do people get more triggered by or intrigued by? Is it your non-monogamy, your veganism, or how you spell your name?
What a question. I appreciate it. Thank you for doing the research / listening to my podcasts, which... It's so interesting. I guess I feel like people contain multitudes. So there are people, I would say that it's between veganism and my name spelling, though usually it's not people that I'm talking to on podcasts who take issue with my, part of who I am, with respect to, my diet, my lifestyle, and the way that I strive to live. And so I feel like it would be, I haven't been on many podcasts where people were like, oh, so I hear you're vegan. Gotcha. Or came onto my podcast and did same, every once in a while, like the information is out there, but every once in a while somebody does, like I've been doing comedy for more than 20 years. I've been vegan for more than 20 years, about that same amount of time. And I feel like I talk about it on pretty much every album and special that I have out there. Pretty much every hour or half hour of comedy has something about it. And still, there are people who haven't listened to everything or anything that I've done. And so a person might meet me and learn afresh, or not even learn and be surprised, or, bring up their non-vegan habits in a way. And I'm not out to shame anyone, or I just want everyone to stop doing the wrong thing, but I don't want anyone to feel bad. I want everyone to feel good, including the animals. That's all. Yeah, exactly. And so I would say probably the answer is so I do my best to not make anyone feel bad, because as a vegan, my goal is to make all sentient beings feel as good as possible, animals, human or otherwise. It's probably the name thing, probably the name spelling. A lot of times people see it but haven't heard it, or have heard it but haven't seen it. And either one of those, or even if you get both or you get neither, I don't care. I do my best to not care, especially because it's something that I've brought upon myself. Like sometimes people seem like they would be more forgiving if they're like, I can't believe your parents did this to you. And I'm like, what about it? What, could you believe that I did it to me? Because you don't have to believe that my parents did it, because they didn't. And they're like, well, names are such an interesting thing, because most people, get one assigned at birth or thereabouts. Don't choose their own name unless you are a rapper or, a newly married traditional, heteronormative lady in a relationship. You might choose to take your partner's name. You might choose. I have friends who have gotten married and made a brand new last name themselves that might combine elements of the names, of the two names, or honor like a maiden name, so to speak. I have a friend who, when she got married, didn't take her husband's name, didn't keep her old name, because she's like, well, that my name, if I kept my name, that's actually my father's name. So she switched back to her mother's name that she had at birth.
Oh, wow.
She's like, let's get that back into the mix. So, and I feel like, why not choose your name? It's your name. Like, I love that in like French. When I learn French, the question is not what is your name, but it's how do you call yourself, or like what do you refer to yourself as, essentially. And I like that, because it's not a thing that just exists, like this name, like you are given this name and it's etched in stone. It's like, well, what do you call yourself? Like, especially because what do you call yourself could mean it's not your legal name, but it's a nickname or something. Like, oh yeah, my name is this, but my friends call me such and such. So why not have fun with it? There's one other thing. I read some sci-fi. I remember a book by N.K. Jemisin, the series, I think it's the Broken Earth trilogy. And it's like award-winning, every book in the trilogy, like a masterpiece. And I believe that characters in that world, they have like several names. Like, you're assigned one when you're born, but also you have one of your names is based on where you're from, and another one is based on, like, so if you move communities, that aspect of your name changes, and it used to be like that, like, Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, that's part of your name or whatever. And some of your name, what part of your name might be from one of your parents, like we have those names like Johnson, Jacobson, that sort of thing, Williamson. Many male-centric historical name offerings. But then I think there was a thing called the use name, and that one's based on like what your job is or what your function in your community or society was in this particular book, if I remember correctly. And I don't know if it's unique to that story, but the idea is, and we have that also, like historically at least, Smith, the name Smith came into being because at least at one point it was a family of blacksmiths or locksmiths or silversmiths or some other kinds of people who smithed things. And so, which is funny because, in comedy, crowd work often utilizes the classic questions of where do you do and what do you do and where are you from? Or where do you do and what are you from? As I almost said, what do you do? Where are you from? So it's like, what's your use name and what's your, location name? So, which is all to say, like, what is the purpose of a name? I mean, one thing is to, like, if somebody says your name, hopefully you look and you're like, oh, that's me. You're talking to me. But also, if they have these other aspects that could be of, like, practical utility, like, why not? Yeah, I mean, some people on Facebook they list themselves as comedian Joe such and such or what have you, which, Jerry, it's not comedian Jerry Seinfeld, but by that point, comedian sort of baked in.
Yep.
But it makes sense that a newer comedian might be like, I want people to know as part of my name that I am the job, the life, the passion comedian.
The hustler,
so
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a real tongue twister to say all of your. Hi, I'm Myq.
Yeah.
I'm a writer, presenter, director, radio host.
Yeah, maybe you pick one or two, but what is it any less unwieldy than a multi-hyphenate name? If the Jones Smiths marry into the Williamson Jacobsons, at some point, get one letter from each. Yeah.
My cousin, he's Sri Lankan, and he has a very large name, which is probably larger than all those hyphenated names merging with the hyphenated names. It's fun to look at.
It happens. But thank you for your first question, which I feel like on the face of it was, of interest. I'm sure that you did legitimately want to know the answer and weren't just demonstrating to me that you have done a thorough, deep dive job into this ain't your grandpa's podcast because he didn't have one. So thank you.
Well,
I appreciate it.
I could see the philosophy mindset of, actually, on that, with the names, you seem to have a lot of knowledge about all of the names. Has that come from purely not how your mind works, but because your name is unique, it's forced you to look deeper into it than the average person would?
That's another good question. The short answer, I'll say, and then I'll give you a much longer answer, but I like that the Dalai Lama once said, when asked a specific question, he said something like, I'm paraphrasing, but I'll use this answer as well now. Briefly, he said, that's a very good question. The answer is simple. I don't know. Now, the fact that I don't know, this is all couched within my not knowing, but I will say that if I had to guess, and I don't have to, but I like guessing, I get it from Guess Who, my mother. We were a guessing family. I'm sorry I didn't give you a chance to guess, but you're not technically. I mean, look, you're family now. We're on a podcast together.
Best friends.
Yeah, if I were to guess, yeah, absolutely. You're one of my best friends. One of my 8 billion, probably less than that, probably 4 billion. Probably one of my, all the people I know.
Top 3.
In college. I had a friend in college whose name was also Myq. And he said to me at one point, or maybe he said to another friend, he said, hey, of all my friends, you're one of them. And it was fun, and I like him. And he's one of them. So this is all to say. Here's my guess is that it is not because I have changed the spelling of my name that names and spellings and like the, sort of history and etymology and the study of or the idea, the game playing of names. I don't think that it's because I did that all of that other stuff interests me, but I think it's perhaps the other way around. Like sometimes people ask the question in this way. They say, I studied linguistics in grad school. I got a master's degree in it, and people, when they hear that, sometimes are like, oh, that makes sense for the kind of comedy that you do. And they ask, is there a cause effect relationship? Like, did you get the degree because you wanted to, explore more of those topics in your comedy, for example, or did you start doing the kind of comedy that you did because you got this specific degree? Because it seems there, and I think that it's like it is a cross-pollination, but also more so, I think that the reason I do some of the kinds of comedy that I do, and and the reason that I was interested in getting a degree in linguistics. I think those two things stem from a deeper root, a common ancestor of those two. And I think that common ancestor is also an ancestor in common with the way that you asked the question, which is, so I think that my interest in names and words stems, I don't know where it comes from or why, but I do remember as far back as at least age 7 and probably farther. But I remember being 7, in second grade, grade 2. I don't know what you would say where you are, but I was 7, and that's when I first learned about diagramming sentences. And I'm like, I've been talking for some time, but the idea that there could be, as Alan Watts puts it, like the world is wiggly and like humans do our best to like create, sort of straight lines. Like look at the grid of a city, and that language itself is like trying to straight lineify in a way like the wiggliness of, the natural communication that used to be just perhaps sounds and gestures, but now we're like, oh no, we can split it up into chop it up into these meaningful units, be they, sentences, paragraphs, words, morphemes, phonemes, phones, like existing acoustically out of our mouths or mentally in our brains and our minds and our consciousness. And as such, so I think all of that, it was just very interesting to me early on. Like I really loved math as well. And this seemed like, and I liked English. I liked, I liked speaking and writing, your classic things that people all do for the most part.
But you enjoyed
I
it.
do. Yeah, I do. I was very into the SATs. I don't know if you have an equivalent there, but it was something that was like a verbal section and a math section, a standardized test. Those were the two basic sections. So I'm like, I liked those. I liked learning in a way. I liked getting good grades. I liked proving that I knew things. So I liked learning things, but I realize now I like learning things for their own sake and to be able to use them and to be able to share them with people. But yeah, back then it was just like, it was exciting for its own sake. For whatever reason, I was like, oh, cool. Like noun phrase, adjective phrase, verb phrase, like all these, that there was more than just, you just say a sentence. It was exciting. And so I think that that part of me has been present, since I was small, and it sort of inspired me, encouraged me to like seek out how playing in that space wherever I could, be it in comedy, be it in school, be it in meeting. Even in my comedy, I will sometimes, if I talk to an audience member, usually I'll ask them what their name is. Often I'll ask them how they spell it, and then aim to have some fun in the space of playing with the spelling or sounds or otherwise manifestations of their name, in addition to perhaps getting to know things about who they are on the inside and not just what they call themselves on the outside. But yeah, I think that might answer your question.
It does. I've got like 50,000 points, but a crucial point, which I don't even have anything to talk to, is that you alluded to this. In society, we often say, this is my name and this is what I do, but it's not all that we are. And it seems like you're uncovering that not only through your comedy, but also through the things that you've said as well.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think it might have in fact been on, I already mentioned the author N.K. Jemisin, but I think she was on Ezra Klein's podcast, which was a fantastic episode of a fantastic show. I'll say fantastic twice. And I think they talked about, maybe she had visited Europe, and in Europe, in America, we ask, as one of our first questions, apparently, what do you do? Because we ascribe, and maybe not just us, but certainly us Australia in a way societally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're like, oh, like, how do you spend most of your waking day? Like, it seems like a reasonable question, but there are other cultures, other places, where the first question might be like, where's your family from? Let's go historically. Where have the Kaplans been for, centuries or decades, or like, have they traveled? Were they from one place? Like, what kind of people are these people? Not just what are they doing on a daily basis? What are they doing on a centuries basis?
I like that. Very intriguing. And what have the Kaplans done over the centuries?
Great question. I know about the last couple decades, at least. I know
but I hope so.
Both my parents, my mom and dad, for most of my growing up child life, were music teachers, and my mom's dad also was a music teacher, and my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was a nurse. My other grandmother was also a teacher, and then my dad's dad is the only grandparent that I didn't meet because he died before I was born. But I understand he owned, or I think he ran. It's unclear to me exactly, based on the longer story that this is a part of, but he managed or ran bars in New York City, nightclubs and that sort of thing. So interestingly, if we say nightclub and stretch it to be like, oh, that's where comedians perform, and and comedy, it's a kind of a music that can teach people. So the Kaplans have been doing comedy, music, nightclub teaching for at least a couple generations.
That is very cool. I want to tie up the name thing, and then I want to hear about the music. Were you born, because I couldn't find this out, was your original name Michael, or was it always Myq?
Michael, Michael, is on my birth certificate.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're basically saying Michael, Kaplan, Kahan. We're like the same people, and we're now best friends as well.
Absolutely.
By one pet peeve, because I was also intrigued by your name. I don't know how you spell Michael wrong. I've seen all types of spelling of Michael, and it was my birthday yesterday, and everyone was spelling my name wrong. It says my name if it's on like Facebook or Instagram or hopefully the SMS. People could not get it right, and it drives me nuts. Did you ever get anything like that? Actually got Myq. So.
I do my best to let those things go, because have you heard this thing? They say, what anyone else thinks about you is none of your business.
Yes.
So I feel like similarly, how anyone else spells your name, like I do my best to not let it bother me, to let it roll off. Like, of course, like, I guess I'll say it like this. I do really love it. It's one of my favorite things in this very constrained, paradigm that we're working in here. One of my favorite things when people spell it right. But also, I will add this, that sometimes, in fact, just the other day, a producer of a comedy show that I was on texted me, and they spelled my name Myq, M-I-K-E. They wrote Myq in the text, and then after the next text, they were like, so sorry, my autocorrect, or voice to text spelled it like that. I know it's M-Y-Q. And two things. One funny thing is that the comedian Mike Birbiglia is someone who I am, I'll say friends with, at least friendly with. Like we know each other. Yeah. Not like you and me, but we're friends who text each other once in a while. And he let me know that apparently we text enough that the algorithm in his own phone will change Myq spelled the standard way to my spelling, even though his own name is Myq spelled the standard way.
That is wild.
So I thought that was really funny. And just to conclude the story of the person texting me the other day, spelling it quote unquote wrong. It's not wrong. If you spell my name M-I-K-E, if you write to me and call me Myq, if you think that my name is Myq spelled M-I-K-E, like, I won't correct you. I won't take offense. I won't be bothered at all. That's actually how I spelled my name for, at this point, certainly a large, you could argue half my life, at least a quarter, more. I've spent a lot of time as a guy who spells his name M-I-K-E, and it is part of me. It is who I am. I mean, in actuality, I mean, sort of the arbitrariness of like the fact that names can mean something, but mostly they only mean like they're a reference to the thing. Like I'm the guy, a Myq by any other name would smell as sweet. Like it. So really, like the spelling is just it's for fun or use, and so if it's not doing either of those things, like I do my best to accept that if somebody spells my name wrong, well, at least if they get it close enough, it's got the use down. If they spell it wrong in a fun way, maybe it's fun, and if they spell it right, then that's fun.
That is very
and useful. Yeah.
I like your perspective on it. Last thing on the names, because my cousin's a midwife, and she used to have a wall of shame. She wouldn't refer to it as the wall of shame, but whenever a kid was named, if it was a particularly interesting name, they'd write the name on the board so all the other nurses and doctors could see. This is the only time I pre-prepared something that might actually come out on the podcast, so I'm excited. Over 200 podcasts. And there are a few, I won't go through all of them, but what do you think is the weirdest way that someone could spell Jackson?
Oh, I mean, I think I could think of I hope that I can think of a weirder way than it actually is. Like, but so I'll say my weirdest guess first, but then I will try to actually guess what it is. So here's the way that I would, probably it starts with a J, but I'm going to say, why not, to get weirder, ZH, that's like a J, Jackson. And then the A, it's probably an A, but it could be an E, Jackson. Then I want to have some number of Qs, some number of Ks, some number of Cs, and an X, and some X's as well. So any
Batman symbol?
Yeah, as many of those, and Prince is in there. Get that in there. But yeah, I mean, because I do like that in the middle of the word Jackson, like you could have CKS the classic way. You could have just an X without any of those. You could have a Q. You could have
No, go on. These are very interesting to me.
And then I think it's gotta end in at least one N, but you could have as many as you want. And then you could have pretty much any vowel. It could, but a Y. I'd go with. I think a Y would be the weirdest one. So I'm gonna say, why not JAXYN?
You are very close. You've made the name less weird given the in-depth knowledge. It's JAXSYN.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
close.
You know your stuff. There was also Xavier, but with the J, so Jack Xavier, but I think they pronounce it Xavier. There was Max Dick. These all got approved. Harrison, but with the J. I don't know. There's a lot of J's. And Viber Shanghai. And so some of those names.
Yeah. Well, I know that the J sound, the letter J as an H sound exists in like the Spanish language. Like Javier is spelled starting with a J. So I feel like that one is like there is a precedent if that is the cultural context.
You are very good with names, and I'm so surprised that you got that Jackson so close. But I think we can wrap up my little bit. You mentioned that you come from a long lineage of, let's just say comedians, but I'd say music. And I know that when you were first starting out and how comedy came into fruition is that you were actually doing music. So was that the goal growing up? Did you always want to be a musician?
Thank you for asking. I will say also when I did that sort of genealogical conglomeration and said that we were all comedians and teachers and and musicians, what have you, I did neglect to include my grandmother. My grandma Iris was a nurse, though a joke that I tell sometimes about her, which is the truth, is that she was so funny that she could have been a comedian, but she became a nurse, and she would always tell me, a comedian, that I should have been a doctor. But she was so funny. So yeah, I mean, also everyone in my mom and my dad both are funny on purpose and elseways, as are we all, I'm sure, self included. But yes.
So you use your I know you've spoken about Iris before in your comedy, and I think also your mum. So you do reference your family to get good bits. I love that.
Ha. Oh yes, I mean my mom is alive still and has encouraged me to anything that she says like is fair game, and so I have, especially since Iris, her mother, died in 2020. I have been sort of uh, accumulating stories about her and like wanting in some ways wanting to keep her memory alive,
Nice.
As the Jews sometimes say when a person has died, may her memory be a blessing and also a lucrative comedy career. Um, so I do have in the works an hour of comedy, or however long it ends up being, that will be focused mainly on my grandmother, and maybe my mother will get her own hour, or maybe she'll be in there with my grandmother.
That's exciting.
But and my dad's, we've got my dad some as well. But to answer, I do talk about them. My grandmother also was always, she had many Facebook comments that still live to this day in my archives. When I see them in memories, I will hold on to them and share them. And I had her on my podcast in 2018.
Oh, nice.
Just 2 years before she died. I was happy to have the conversations, and I remember telling her that, I feel like I forget the order that it happened, but a lot of people really enjoyed listening, found it moving, found it meaningful, funny, enjoyable, valuable in ways. And I remember my grandmother saying, if not right after we finished recording, she was like, "Well, I don't know who's going to enjoy listening to that." My God. I was like, I had a wonderful time. She's like, well, I'm glad you did, Not to imply, I think she did as well. But to answer your question about music, I know that my grandmother did play, I believe, the violin poorly, according to her. But like I said, her husband and my two parents, and at least my other grandmother, was also a musician, if not professionally. I know she played the piano.
Wow.
So yeah, music has been like, I would say the same way. I don't know how big like religion or spirituality is in your culture compared to the States, but like, I forget what the exact numbers are, but like, a majority of people in the United States, I think, would say they're associated with some religious background, that they either grew up with it, maybe still practice it, a lot of people. There's an old Jeff Ross joke where he's like, my family was Jewish, like not super practicing, like we only went to temple, we only went to synagogue twice a year on Christmas and Easter. And so, which is playing on the idea, like that there are some Christians who only go to church on those holidays, but they're like, we're the thing, even if we're not doing. We are the thing even if we're not doing the thing. And there's certainly many Jews who are Jews culturally, community-wise, or identity-wise, if not practicing, if not metaphysically, many other ways. And so this is all to say, like, and my family is Jewish in that way, like that. I would say both of my parents have said that, it's not only that we are Jewish, like historically or ethnically or culturally. I mean, I think they would say those things, but also they would be like, well, so there's like something, right? Something, who knows? Who knows what the thing is, which is a very Jewish way to say that there's something. Who knows what kind of thing there might be? Yeah, I don't know. It's good. Maybe not me, but who am I to say? These are not their voices. But it's very easy to get into the voice of my people from the past.
That is the collective consciousness of our people. It's right there.
Yeah. And so, but this is all to say, I think that music in my house was, practically speaking, more of the religion that was practiced.
Interesting.
In a specific way, I was given the choice as to whether I wanted to go to Hebrew school, Sunday school at the synagogue, to take lessons, to learn, to get to have a bar mitzvah. I was like, kind of like they, put their thumb down on the scale. They're like, you get a party, you get presents, but that was my choice. But learning music was not my choice. It was presented as a choice when I was 4 years old, but I don't remember. But I think it was presented as the choice, what instrument do you want to learn? The violin or like a little bigger violin?
And if you don't, we won't feed you.
Ha ha ha. And so there's never a time that I really remember not playing the violin. And so from age 4 through 17, through the end of high school, secondary school, before university, I took private violin lessons once a week. And I, for the most part, didn't enjoy it. I resented having to do it. I didn't like, it became like homework. Like I'm sure that a lot of people feel about having to go to church or having to go to synagogue or the mosque or whatever temple or, whatever. There's a lot of people who they grow up like, I don't wanna. And that's the way that I was. Like as a young child, I threw tantrums at my lessons, like would, bang my fists on the floor. But, it was not only a lesson a week that I had to go to. Eventually, starting at age, I'm not even sure, but a single digit age for sure, every Saturday, we lived in New Jersey. And so we would drive an hour or two into Queens, New York, where I live, where I podcast with you from right now. We wouldn't come to this very apartment, but we would come to there was a college or a couple of different colleges, and then there was one that was closer to us later in my childhood. But so I think at least 3 or 4 different like music programs for children, for young adults, for students, where I would go every Saturday. And it was like all day. There were maybe like 5 different kinds of classes. There was like a master class where you would, perform and somebody would help critique you in front of the class. And was the private lesson was on the separate day. Usually some people had them that day. There was a theory lessons. So, like learning, how Bach did what he did and learning how to do that and learning also, like different scales and chord structures and modes and, learning a little bit of how to, use a keyboard and creating, melodies, harmonies, and 4-part pieces that could be sung or played. And then there was an orchestra, there were smaller group meetings, ensembles. And then eventually I was also, during the week, meeting with this quartet of like 3 other kids. Like it was 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. So every Saturday, pretty much all day, I was at these classes. Monday nights, I had my private lesson. And then Wednesday nights, I would have this quartet, which is also similar to when I was going to Sunday school or Hebrew school. I think on Sundays, we would learn the history of the Jewish people and the Torah. Like on Monday we would learn, or Wednesday, it was Monday or Wednesday also, that we would learn Hebrew, actually how to read it, but not how to speak it, how to read it, but not how to understand it.
Yeah, actually.
And then on the other day, that was neither Monday nor, it was Monday, it was Wednesday, if it was Wednesday, it was Monday, there were specific bar mitzvah classes. So there was a time when I was taking 3 days of Jewish stuff, 3 days of religion, and 3 days, those same 3 days, I think, of music. Maybe there was a jostling, so it wasn't every week, all 6 of those things back to back to back. At least on the weekend, it was Saturday. They switched, but it was usually Saturday for music and Sunday for Jewish learning. And so this is all to say, I didn't love it. It wasn't what I wanted to do my whole life, my whole childhood. It was the thing that I had to do until one of the biggest early shifts of my growing experience as a human, as a child at least, was that my parents found a summer camp called Bucks Rock. Creative and Performing Arts Camp, I think something like that is the full name, but it's a summer camp where you can do anything that you want to do all day. You just have to do something. Like, you don't have to do specific activities. If you never want to go to pottery, you never have to. If you never want to play in the orchestra, you don't have to. Like, if it was for performances, like they had, plays, musicals, they had sketch comedy, eventually stand-up comedy, they had improv comedy, all part of this place called the Clown Shop. They had dance, they had music. You could play in a jazz band, an orchestra, a rock band. You could take private lessons. You could play in ensembles. And if you were in something that met with other people, then you would go at that time, but you didn't have to sign up for it. You could just show up and paint all day. You could just knit all day. You could, knit for an hour, paint for an hour, throw pots for an hour, glass blow for a half hour. And so there was tons of this stuff. The founder of the camp, the two founders, Ernst and Ilse Bulova. Ernst, at least, had studied with Maria Montessori, who inspired this type of school wherein
I went to one.
Oh, yeah. So
For a period.
you're not going to one right now?
No. I'm glad that you thought I could have.
Yeah, you look young. So that was the spirit of the camp. And though my mom put a sort of a stipulation on my going there, she was like, you can do anything you want, but she's like, I started there when I was 11. She's like, you have to play in the orchestra. I don't want you not playing the violin all summer. Like, I didn't have to take lessons, but just play in the orchestra. So I was like, that was a fine bargain. But the beautiful thing that happened, the beautiful thing that happened socially is that my parents were in the process of, in my early teens or tween-age years, around between 12 and 14, my parents got divorced. And so we moved a couple times, and there was like some, various, not massive upheaval, but, some sort of shaking of the foundations of like what my life had always been, living with these two people in this one house. And also, so I'd switched schools, and I now didn't really know how to make friends because I never really made friends, because I sort of had the friends that I had from when I was in kindergarten or first grade. And so I'd become kind of like shy and, introverted in the 8th, 9th grade, age 12, 13, 14. But at the summer camp, it was just a world where all these other sort of artsy, misfits, these, weirdo outcasts from their school life would come, the grayscale, before you enter the Matrix or know that you're in the Matrix or come into the real world, or maybe better, the Wizard of Oz, it's like all the real, so the real world seemed black and white, but then every summer for 2 months, it was this beautiful, harmonious, colorful this array of rainbows. And so like I met kids there who were like just the kindest people, the most creative people, the funniest people, the nicest people, like, and some of them are still like my friends, 3 decades later. Some of my best friends are people that I met as a teenager at this camp, because this one particular friend, my friend Ari, before, we were kind of friends and we hung out together, but he was like, hey, you should like come hang out with me and these other people. And he just like invited me into this group of friends, and I'm like, wow, this is so, I learned that people could be and were compassionate, that like that friendship and like living life didn't have to be, I don't know, transactional. And it was just like people were, nice. They were very giving and generous and offered of their time and selves. And I was like, thank you, Ari, for like, introducing me to these people in this group of friends. And he was like, well, thank you. You're cool, And I was like, oh, well, that's, yeah, thank you so much. And Ari was actually the person whose guitar was the very first guitar that I ever played, because we were hanging out, I think during the school year at one point, because he lived in New York and I lived in New Jersey. He came to visit. He brought his guitar. He went to use the bathroom. I picked up his guitar and I was kind of like twanging some of the strings. I figured out, I think, I was like, oh, if you just play these strings, it sounds like this song. It was like the Star Trek theme song. You can just play, you don't have to put your finger down. And you're just like, oh, I'm like, oh, you can do that. I started figuring out a couple other things, and I was like, this is fun. And then I was like, I told my dad, and he had an old guitar from when he was in high school, and he gave me that. And so I started just, noodling around on it. My mom, because she has has a piano, plays piano, has taught piano. She had a bunch of books that had a bunch of piano songs in it with the chords written in, where you could also see the chords as your fingers are meant to put on the strings of the guitar. And so I found the very first song I ever played on the guitar. That was the one that I had played. I could put my fingers in all the places without stretching, without needing to do bar chords or any fancy fingering. Was I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor. I was like, oh, like it has some interesting chords, but they're all easy enough to play for, a beginner guitarist, which is, I was the most beginner guitarist at the point, but I taught myself a little, and then I found some other songs and I started playing at camp, and I never really took any lessons per se, but I like played with other people who were better than me and knew more than me, and like they showed me some things, and
you would have sorry for cutting off. You would have had the understanding from the intensive theory and playing the violin over.
Exactly. And so it was much easier having learned, another stringed instrument that, uses the dexterity of the fingers on your left hand, mainly to do the fun stuff. And the theory, in the brain, like made it so, yeah, of course, like I do this chord, I do that chord, I do this chord. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. All I had to do is learn, the violin has 4 strings, G, D, A, E. They're separated by fifths. The guitar is mainly separated by fourths, except for one that's separated by a third. But just, learn there's different shapes that you can do on the guitar. There's different shapes you could do on the violin. And it's just like learning, it's like music is kind of a language. It is. I would say it is a language, and that like or maybe there's like different dialects where like learning the violin was one dialect, and that the guitar, another stringed instrument, was like a similar. It wasn't exactly like British English and American English or Australian English, but like, it's like, here's Cockney or something, like, which I know is a kind of a British English, but like, there's certain kinds of English that get farther and farther away from your dialect, and you're like, well, is that a different language at this point? And so I feel like, yeah, the guitar and the violin were close enough that I was able to pick it up so simply that I loved it so much. And here's a brief, if you don't mind, a brief story, an analogy. There's a Jewish folk writer named Isaac Bashevis Singer. Do you know that guy?
No.
He wrote a bunch of stories, among other things, a bunch of short stories that I think my grandfather read to me when I was a kid, the grandfather who I knew. Be weird if the other one read them to me. Yeah, from beyond the grave, there's a man. And so several of the stories are about these people from a made-up town in Eastern Europe called Chelm, and the people of that town are stupid. That's the whole thing. The people in that town are dumb, and a lot of things happen to them because of that. And some of them are smarter than others. So sometimes the stories are within the town, like, oh man, the elders of the town, like the people who run the town, they're the dumbest. And then there's other people who don't have power. They know a little bit, but too bad these dumb people are in charge. But there's one story about a young man who like goes out into the world, and one of the things that he does is, he's from this town, he's dumb. He goes to a restaurant and he orders some food because he's hungry, and they bring him the thing he orders, and he eats it, and he's like, I'm still hungry, and he keeps ordering. He orders another thing, he keeps ordering, and still not hungry, still not full, still hungry. Eventually, he orders everything on the menu. He's ordered so many things, they keep bringing him. Finally, he orders a cookie, and they bring him the cookie, and he's like, that's good, I'm full now. And then his takeaway is, he's like, man, imagine we should have just had me have the cookie first, because if I'd only known that it was the cookie that would make me full, then I wouldn't have ordered all of that other stuff. You see, betraying the foolishness of this Chelmite. I don't know if they call him that, but I tell you that to tell you this, that I legitimately, when I was 15 years old, picking up the guitar and learning it and loving it, not even thinking of it as practicing. For hours a day I would play. I'm like, this is playing. I'm playing music. I'm playing in music. I was like, wow, oh my God, I love playing the guitar. I was like, man, I don't like playing the violin. Ugh, oh man, but the guitar, ooh, ah, I love it. And I really had the thought, I was like, man, if only I had known how much I would love the guitar back when I was 4. If only we'd started me on guitar when I was 4 instead of violin, I could have had 11 more years of loving the guitar than I had, not realizing that I'd heard that story, but I hadn't realized that I was the fool in that story, like not realizing that in order to get to the end, sometimes you need to do the beginning and the middle.
You just summarized the entire podcast, being the theme with failure and how it's so thank you. We're done. Thank you so much. In terms of, a stepping stone, a lot of the things, that we do in our life can actually be a stepping stone towards the success that we try. So doing music led you into comedy, for example. And I believe that, go on. Anything's.
Yeah, absolutely. In a brief interlude, my friend Ramin Nazer, Ramin Nazer is a wonderful comedian, podcaster, musician, and perhaps maybe most known now across the internet for being a visual artist. His Instagram is beautiful, colorful, philosophical, like rainbow-filled, psychedelic. Like,
is that the one? Sorry, is that the one that you did the book with? Or am I getting the
Yes, 100%. That is right. Ramin Nazer and I, he illustrated many of my jokes for a book that we called Heartbrain Art Train that just came out earlier this year. And yeah, so he's also he's illustrated the logos for my podcasts and for at least one or two of my albums. And so I work with him any chance that I get, and I recommend everybody else check out Ramin Nazer. The reason I bring him up now is there's one or two of his, I feel like there's 2 different pieces of art of his that I'm referencing that sort of like collapse into one in my head, but the ideas within them. So a lot of his stuff is inspirational or motivational, but also a lot of it is like, I don't like when things are so inspirational or motivational. Oh God, and trying to help himself, like game his own system, and like he wants to be productive, he wants to create, he wants to live a joyful, fulfilling, excited, like meaningful, creative life, and live in the world, and there's many obstacles, and so a lot of his art is about all of that. And he has these 1 or 2 different pieces, one of which is specifically about music. Are you a musician? Have you played music?
I played the guitar, but I was kind of forced to play guitar, so I haven't really played much.
Look at us.
Yeah.
Yin yang. We should try the violin.
I actually want to. I know it's like the hardest instrument, but it is something I'm considering. But continue.
Very cool. So do you know that, like, on a piano, there's white keys and black keys?
Yep.
You've seen that?
Yep.
Do you know that if you start on like on the note C, any C on the piano, and go up to the next C using only the white keys, it goes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That will sound like a major scale, like your classic scale, like la da 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 da. That might not be in C, but that it'll sound, any major scale sounds like that. You could start it at any place. On the piano, if you start it on a white key, you can just use the white keys. And if you play a black key, it won't be in the key of C. The key of C involves only on the piano the white keys. Now, Ramin has this one piece of art that talks about how if you're like soloing in a particular key, he's like, if you hit a note that doesn't sound right, if you hit a note that isn't in the key that you're playing in, he's like, no need for concern. All you have to do is move a half step in either direction, and then you will be in the key that you're looking for. Like, there's no way, because every black key that is not in the key of C, if you moved one to the left or one to the right, it's a white key that is in the key of C. And so there's like a metaphor, and that's the one that I mix it up with. Is he's also like, we're always just like one, or maybe this is the same thing. We're always just like a half step away from being in the flow. Like if you feel like you're resisting something, like noting that you're resisting it is a step away from that resistance. Or if we're sad or upset or angry or annoyed or any emotion that we wouldn't will ourselves to have or wish that we had, if sometimes those are useful emotions, but sometimes we're like, oh, I wish I didn't feel this way. Sometimes they say there's no way around, the only way past it is through. That we need to, like, if we're feeling something, it's important to feel what we're feeling because we are feeling it. Like, it doesn't even make sense to say it's important to, because it is what we're feeling. But it's sort of like the way that, I don't know, with 12-step programs, if you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, the first, at least, I don't know if it's the first step literally, but the first thing at the meeting is you're like, this is my name. This is what I call myself. Names are so important. And the next piece of information is I'm an alcoholic, or I'm, addicted to gambling, or I'm whatever the thing is, because my friend Zach Sherwin and I, Zach, one of my best friends, dear friend, love his comedy, his music, his crossword show. If you're ever in a place where he's doing the crossword show, see it. But also he's got tons of videos and tracks online. Recommended. Zach and I, we talk most days, and have you heard of a familect? Do you know what that word means? So you've heard of a dialect. Yep. So the lect part means the same thing, and the fam part means family. And so it's basically a familect is that sometimes within families, they'll develop their own kind of like inside joke based, or just, like with my mother, one time during the pandemic, we were on the phone and she was telling me, like during the lockdown phase, she was like, I'm getting ready to, it's like midday, I'm getting ready to have like breakfast, or I guess lunch, brunch, breakfast, lunch, brunch, first meal, And I was like, yeah, because it was the time of lunch, but it was her first meal, which should be breakfast, but it could be brunch. And she said all those things. And so I suggested, I'm like, just for ease of communication, I'm like, oh, I mean, if we want, we could just say first meal. Like, then it doesn't matter. Like, if it's your first meal, like that's the new name. The use name of the meal Genius. Is first meal. And so now my mom and I, like, she'll use it as the thing all the time. Like when, if she'll be like, I haven't had first meal yet, just like as part of our normal daily conversation. It is in our family dialect or familect. And so this is all to say that in the familect that I share with Zach, my, brother, who I'm not related to, have you heard, I think it's Armistead Maupin. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I think it's he who coined the phrase, you have your biological family and you have your logical family. So Zach, my brother in logic, my logical familial
second
bro friend.
Yeah,
exactly. Right after you. Zach and I will, when we talk, if we are experiencing a challenge, one of us, and we want to bring it to the other for, to sort of talk it through and see if we want help or if we just want to be heard. One of the things that we don't want to wallow in, in the negative space but we want to honor it and be present with it and acknowledge it and name it, literally name it. And what we have named naming the challenging experience or emotion, we have named it Rumpelstiltskinning, because in the story of Rumpelstiltskin, when it was learning and I think saying the name of that villainous being in the story that took away his power. Once you learned his name, once you said his name, he no longer had power, which is just like, very equivalent. I'm very ambivalent about saying very equivalent. But just like going to a 12-step meeting and saying, this is my name and I am an alcoholic, because if you don't admit it, if you don't name it, if you don't know it, if you don't say it, then have you how can you begin to address it if you don't say that this is the problem or this is the challenge or this is the thing?
Yeah, that's very smart.
So that is how we named Rumpelstiltskinning. And going back to the idea of always being a half step out of the flow, like whatever emotion we're experiencing, like, naming doesn't make us feel 100% better about it, but I can only speak for my own experience, and I know that it maybe has happened for other people.
Definitely.
I know that maybe, that like it could even be that I'm like upset and I don't know why, and then sometimes my girlfriend helps me. Sometimes I can realize myself, it's like, oh, I haven't eaten, or I haven't drank enough water, or I didn't get enough sleep, or I just had, an upsetting experience, or I don't feel physically, well, or whatever it might be. And sometimes remembering that thing is like, oh, well, of course. Or even sometimes when people get a diagnosis for a disease or a disorder, like, or something that there's a lot of people these days who are being diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum. And that can really help people be like, oh, there's other people who experience some of what I'm experiencing. That there is a name for it can be so powerful. Like if you have, going back into the realm of like, physical illness, like there are people who are seeking, like who have symptoms that if they don't know what constellation all of these all these symptom stars belong to, like that can be really challenging, really frustrating. There are people who are like, oh, when I learned what I have, like it didn't cure it, but it was at least the first step towards like, at least it's sort of, I guess it's like in Buddhism, I think this will be relevant. They talk about the second arrow. Do you know that thing?
No, please. Very interesting.
So I'm going to paraphrase, probably not optimally, but I think the idea is that like if you get shot with an arrow, like the best thing to do is to try and to deal with that arrow, but that sometimes when we get, shot metaphorically with an arrow, if something's bothering us, like let's say we have a sadness, then if I add things on top of it, like, woe is me, like I shouldn't be feeling sadness, like it's not that big a deal, or like I'm the kind of person who doesn't experience sadness. Like these are all thoughts and feelings that I've had over the years and still do sometimes. Like, no, it should be a certain way, like resisting what is, that there is this arrow that you've been shot with is like shooting yourself with a second arrow or being shot with a second arrow. And the idea, maybe this is not the best way to frame it because suffering is a translation of a certain concept in Buddhism that has a specific meaning. But sometimes people say like pain is necessary in life, but suffering is optional.
Yes.
Like, and so pain is the first arrow in this analogy and suffering is the second arrow. And naming something can really, I think, help eliminate at least decrease the suffering of the second arrow a little bit.
I think that's really important. I speak about this a lot. For some reason, I don't identify as this, but a lot of people think that I'm a Buddhist, which is really interesting. And I know that I think you are one, or you identify with a lot of the philosophies. It is so crucial that we address something, in particular with the emotions. This is what's happening, not sweep it under the rug, because then when we do it, and then there's more arrows being hit because we've created all of these other things that we haven't dealt with. So by like putting our hand up and saying, this is what's happening, I'm aware of it, we can then address it instead of just being, which we do. And I do this all the time, and I probably don't even have awareness about how many times I do it, but we do it all the times. And that's just the first stage, which is so crucial. And that does a lot of the healing for us. So I think it is very important and wise.
Yeah. I'm just having this thought now. Like, I know that naming and names have sort of been a thread running through this conversation. And so I'm going to name this thought that I have, or do something that it's illuminating to me, because I do think that, one thing about Buddhism, which you are right, that I do certainly resonate and identify with a lot of the philosophies and teachings. I have not taken any specific vows. I do not specifically practice in a formal way, but I read a lot about it and I like it a lot. And I have a good friend who is a practicing Buddhist, and I talk with him a lot about these concepts. Second best friend to you.
Thank you. I
But
appreciate that you addressed that. You named it.
And so there's a concept in Buddhism called like the middle way or the middle path.
Yep.
And that the idea, I feel like it can have analogies, throughout life. The idea that one extreme might not be healthy, the other extreme might not be healthy. How can we find balance in the middle? Whether it's, like if somebody is too brave, let's say, then you can, if you're not, sort of tempering that with caution when reasonable, then you might, run in foolishly to situations where you don't need to, and, you might die or get hurt. Whereas also, if you are too cautious on the other end, you might never leave your home. And if you are able to do that, then you might well be served by doing that. You might live a more, live less of the life than you could.
Yep.
And so the middle path between, extreme caution and extreme like bravery that borders on like foolhardiness. And so I feel like there's the middle path that I've introduced to get to the thing that I'm naming about naming, which is that sometimes the kind of comedy that I do, sometimes it is merely playing with words. Sometimes it is, there's actually another cartoon of Ramin's that I really like where he says something, there's a guy who's like made of rainbows, like it just completely like layers, colors upon colors. And then a less colorful being, like, black and white, blobby individual, like points at that, the colorful, the rainbow, complete all the colors of the rainbow being, and is like, hey, you're that blue guy, right? And I think that captures something so beautiful about like the way that I feel, like, because I don't think that all of my comedy is about words. In fact, a friend of mine, Jacqueline Novak, a wonderful comedian, so funny, she once said to me, she's like, I don't think that your comedy is about words. She's like, I think your comedy is about a man obsessed with words. And I thought that was beautiful and hilarious. And also, so I do feel like sometimes people see the playing of the words and they're like, oh, you're that blue guy, right? You're that wordplay guy. And I'm like, yes. And also, yes, and more. And so I think, though, that there is an element of words that we can be playful with them in ways that are no more meaningful than just having fun with them, that, oh, and that's enough. Isn't that enough? But on the other hand, there are certain kinds of comedy, let's say, certain kinds of art, certain kinds of musical lyrics that use words to communicate more than just, the surface level fun of playing with those particular words, but that get to deep concepts about, their life and love and loss and all kinds of meaningful, powerful things. And that is, the beauty and power that words also have, that I feel like the thing that I'm struggling to say now, because it's kind of an idea that's being born, is that I feel like on the one hand, perhaps there can be frivolous speech. There can be, in Buddhism, there's a specific prohibition of idle speech. And it's, speech that is, there's certain characteristics that speech optimally has to be like useful and kind and, not extra in any ways. And there's obviously, different I'll leave that there. I don't want to add any idle speech to the mix, but there's something like that.
Yep, gotcha.
And so I feel like that's one end of the spectrum, is like too much speech. Could have too much speech, like at a time when there could better be silence or listening or, something that isn't just, a wall of chatter, which I am prone to do. Someday, as he says on a podcast that's bordering on, 80 or 90 minutes. But on the other end is like, if you don't use speech at all, then there's a missing out of like certain of communication, of the beauty of what, what language can communicate, what art can communicate, what comedy can communicate. And so I feel like the middle path there, the idea that I mean, comedy isn't ever, even wordplay isn't about just wordplay. Like if I choose to tell a joke, I'm like, well, I'm choosing to tell that joke for a reason. And who knows what the reason might be. Maybe me, hopefully me. But when you're telling a joke, like, it has the content of the joke, and it also has, like, for the equal opportunity offenders, so to speak, quote unquote, that I feel like your Don Rickles insult comic kind of folks who, some still exist now, who are like, I'm gonna say, and some people do this, say controversial, quote unquote, offensive things in an artful, hilarious way, and it's wonderful. Like, I think Sarah Silverman's old act, or maybe even her newer things too, like she's a boundary pusher, an envelope pusher, like, but beneath it there is like reasons for it, and it's meaningful and thoughtful and funny. And sometimes, and I'm not saying that like she's not doing it with wordplay, but we're on the okay. She's not just out to offend people for the sake of offending people. She's out to like make a point, say a thing that she cares about or means in some specific way. And there are some people who I think are less thoughtful in the way that they do that. They might be like, look, I'm just gonna make fun of this group and that group and this group and that group, and that's like, it is allowed, and it is fine. And also, like, often they might not be doing it to their own group. Often it's like a straight white cisgender able-bodied male who's like, I'll offend all the people except for the privileged class that I'm a part of. Or even if I do go after myself, like, it's not equitable, even if it is equal, like that there is an imbalance in power in society. Like, it's not to say that you can't make jokes about race or religion or ethnicity or gender or sexual identity or orientation. But what is the joke that you're telling? Why are you telling it? Who are you in relation to the content of the joke? And that if some people are just like, the just asking questions crowd, like, well, why are you asking that question and not a different question? Whether it's about, like trans rights or gay rights or racial identity, there are, not all questions are created equal, and not all jokes, and not all pieces of art, and not all pieces of music, not all podcasts. And so I think that is one of the beautiful strengths of language, is that we now have so many words that we can apply to so many different concepts to get out from within us, the thing. That's the thing. The thing is, like, the function of words. Like, wordplay can be frivolous. Speech can be idle. And also, words are some of the most powerful tools that we have to get at the emotional experiences and the concepts that exist in the world that we share around us. Like, when previously we might have been, and other species are limited to, pointing, or the like. So yeah, I don't know who I'm arguing against, but language is powerful, and that's why we've been talking this whole time about talking.
We could speak about that for many more hours. That just kind of sprung to mind, and we might have to talk about this another time. But you spoke about balance and flow and resistance and how you see words. But I'm just wondering, how has that impacted your view of success in terms of being a comedian for 20 years? There's highs and lows. You've got obviously a deep understanding of yourself and kind of the world. So I'm just wondering, how is that all tied into your success?
Sure. Thank you. So I think there's at least two different, there's probably as many definitions of success as there are people, but there's at least two broad categories. One is success on one's own terms, and one is success on the terms of others. And like, I've come to a place now, 20 plus years into comedy, I want to succeed on my own terms. And so what does succeeding on my own terms mean is kind of that I get to have things on my own terms. That I would rather, for example, like tell jokes that I care about and have them not be well received than tell jokes that I don't care about and have them be well received. I would rather, quote unquote, fail on my own terms than succeed on someone else's terms. To be able to fail on my own terms is part of success on my own terms. And so I think that when I was starting out, I think that most people when they're starting out, but I'll speak for myself, like we only have other people's terms. We don't know what our own terms are going to be. So for example, like I say this sometimes, that when I started out doing comedy, I felt like I was more asking jokes than telling jokes, because you're like, is this funny? Is this funny? What about this? Is this funny? And eventually, like, sort of the metaphor breaks down, because still, when I try something new, I don't know if it's going to make an audience laugh. But for the most part, whatever I say now, I'm saying for a reason, because I want to. I used to like write down every idea that I thought could be funny or interesting or whatever it might be, or unique to me. And I was like, maybe this will be good. Maybe this will be good. Who knows? And I would really depend a lot on what people laughed at to steer me. And I still that's a part of it, but much more now, if I have a joke that's about a thing that I care about, I will spend a lot more time on a lot more audiences trying to get it the way that I want to get it, as opposed to being like, well, it didn't work. Like I had a joke once that I was like, I thought it was good, didn't work a couple times, and then a friend saw it on my notebook and was like, try it again, I think it's good. And I found out I had to like add a couple things to it. I like hadn't finished it yet, but it was a good idea that led me somewhere. I was like, oh yeah, great. So I'm like, kind of any idea that I have, I realize, if I spend enough time thinking about it and caring about it, like, well, now I can just, what do I want to talk about? I'm not beholden to just whatever people laugh a little bit at the first time I try something. And so I feel very fortunate that I've been able to succeed on society's terms, which are like, since 2008, I have been making my living doing comedy and comedy related things, but basically comedy, that I haven't had to work a day job since 2008. I used to work, I worked as a barista, I was a dishwasher, I was a sandwich maker, I worked, variously. I worked at a bookstore. That's where I was the barista. I don't mean to double dip, but I worked at a technology company doing linguistics related work.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, for next time. And but eventually in 2008, that was the first year that I was like, I think I can make it with just the money that I'm making in this upcoming set of months. And let's see if I can keep that going. And I've been able to keep that going, and it continues. It is in the infinite game. I don't know if you heard of finite and infinite games.
Finite games.
Finite and Infinite Games. It's a book that I haven't read, but the main concept is baseball, football. Those are finite games. There are rules. You get to the end of it, somebody wins. Catch, throwing a frisbee, infinite game. The reward is there's no ending. The game is it can go on infinitely, and winning is playing. There's no winning. The way that some people might think that in a relationship, like, it's a finite game. You get married, you win. But really, the best relationships are infinite games where you get to keep having the relationship. Or in comedy, people might think, getting on TV, getting a special, getting a this, getting a that, the finite game. You've done it. You've won. But really, it's an infinite, as long as you're alive, it's an infinite game. Living is an infinite game while you're alive. And so I'm very grateful that I, thus far, for the past 15 years, have gotten to play this infinite game. And that, I forget if there was some other element to your question that was relating to words specifically, that I was meant to tie in to my definition of succeeding.
No, you did very well. You answered it well. It was more around the balance and the flow and how you view it
Oh,
on your terms. Yeah.
of course, I appreciate that. I'll button it up like this. That I mean, of course, I'm not immune to seeing a friend of mine or another comedian like get a gig that I'm like, ooh, I would love to have that gig. Or even people who like I did a half hour in Comedy Central over a decade ago, and I see other people getting them now. And I'm like, oh, I want that. I'm like, I had that. I want what I had. And so being able to swap it and take a step back, one half step away, having named the thing from the back into the flow of gratitude, of the joy for the things that I do have, that I have accomplished, that like even if nothing else ever happened in my career, like I have lived a meaningful life. I'm happy that I get to keep living it and keep doing comedy and keep having ideas and keep sharing them and keep making albums and specials and podcasts. Oh my, But yeah, I love. I think that is loving doing it is the success. And so if I can remember, and in fact, the thing that I'm about to start after we stop recording is a writing workshop called the Writing Jacuzzi. That is so named for this reason. I believe that it's a friend of mine that runs this writing workshop where I won't tell you everything about it, but somebody asked me once, like they found out that I was a comedian and they're like, wow, like you get to do it, you must love it, right? I'm like, I do love it, but every once in a while it's like a jacuzzi where you get into a jacuzzi and it's really warm and you're like, this feels great. But then once you're in it for 10 minutes, it just feels regular. It's just your experience. You're not like, you don't have the same experience of getting into it. But if you get out of it and then get back into it for a second, you're like cold and then warm again. And so when people say things like, you must love doing comedy, like I love to, that's like pulling me out of the water for a moment and be like, and then I can dip myself back in and be like, yes, the jacuzzi, the warmth of the reality of my experience. And so my friend Lissa, who runs the writing workshop, was like, I'm going to call these the writing jacuzzi. So remembering that I live in a jacuzzi, and sure, there's bacteria here and there, but we try to keep it hot enough and varied enough, and invite new people in. Like, the metaphor doesn't matter, but yeah, just remembering that I love what I do. I love my girlfriend. I love our life. I love my friends. I love getting to make things on my own and with the people that I love. Getting to try to help the world as best I can, in whatever way I can. Like, it's sort of, an honor and a privilege and a delight. And so sometimes, if I'm hungry or tired or my throat hurts, I might forget those things. But I do my best to remember, and it's nice to have other people around asking thoughtful, sweet, good questions to remind me and to, dip me out and back into that jacuzzi. So thank you for asking.
You're a wise man. That is a very contagious perspective. Before we go, how can people follow you and check out your comedy specials and all of that cool stuff?
Thank you for asking that. So my name, Myq Kaplan, is spelled weird, as we've alluded to. It's Myq Kaplan. You put that anywhere in the internet where you want to find things like comedy albums. Put it into your various streaming services, and you'll find my latest album, AKA, and an assortment of other albums, at least 5 or 6. A special on Amazon called Small, Dork, and Handsome. You'll find my podcasts, which are called Broccoli and Ice Cream and The Faucet. You'll find Myq Kaplan spelled that way all over social media. I put, little clips, all the places that people put clips here and there. I do have a Substack newsletter. It's myqkaplan.substack.com. It comes out for free once a week, and also you can subscribe for more. I do have that new book that you mentioned, Heartbrain Art Train. It's available at raminnazer.com and myqkaplan.com, which is my website, of course. And I do have a new special out on Dry Bar Comedy this year, which this week, right as we recorded, I just got a notification that it's free. I don't know if it's only free for the week, but you can watch it for free. Go on to drybarcomedy.com, look for my name. And if it's not free and you're listening in the future, use the promo code Myq Kaplan and you can get a free month of Dry Bar. And I think those are... I have a Patreon for one of my podcasts as well. But yeah, put Myq Kaplan anywhere, spelled my spelling, and you should find what you're looking for. But mainly comedy albums, and come see me if I'm where you are.
Amazing. You're a mensch. This is beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'll put most of those in the episode notes below. And yes, thank you for sharing your mind with me today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a delightful conversation.
Myq has an interesting take on naming our issues. He explains that this doesn't necessarily make us feel better about the issue, but gives us awareness to tackle it head on. By naming it, Myq is highlighting how we can now move on to the next stage of healing and with heightened awareness. By acknowledging and naming the feeling, emotion, or problem, one is able to move forward and heal. We don't need to sweep it under the rug anymore. Myq goes one step further and explains the second arrow concept from the Buddhist philosophy, which essentially is all about dealing with suffering more skillfully. The premise is that in life we can't always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. The second arrow is optional. This goes with the saying, pain is necessary, but suffering is optional. So Myq encourages us to deal with whatever feeling, issue, or problem that arises before it manifests more deeply. In other words, be present and go with the flow, but more importantly, address what's happening in the moment. So in conclusion, the story of the two arrows by the Buddha states that life often shoots an arrow at you and wounds you. However, by not accepting what has happened, by worrying about it, by saying it was unfair and wondering how long the pain will last, we tend to shoot a second arrow into the open wound and increase and prolong the pain. Pain is often a given, but suffering is optional. Thank you for listening to the Funny and Failure podcast, exploring the deeper side of comedy.